Hello Knife World, Alex here. I am bringing you another knife video on a Stan Wilson non-flipper flipper. If you found this video, you probably already know what this is, but I'm going to do my impressions of it and talk about it. This is mine, and I've owned a non-flipper flipper before, sold it, and bought another one. So we're also going to talk about that because I think it tells you a lot about this knife. So this knife is a bit of a fingerprint magnet, so I'm going to show you around it first. It's already open, as you can see, so that I can kind of show you the details of it before I smudge it all up, and then I'll talk about it and smudge it up, and it'll be okay. But the configuration on this, guys, you can see it's got a Damascus blade, and Stan hot blues his Damascus blades. I don't see a lot of other tactical folder makers hot bluing their Damascus blades, but I have seen on YouTube a couple of fixed blade makers that have done like tutorials on how they hot blue and stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see that, but it's an attractive blade, and this particular blade is smooth. It's smooth to the finish, so you can see how some of them have like grooves. This one is pretty much perfectly smooth. You can see it's a very attractive pattern too. It's kind of got a kind of circular motif going on, but it's also got this like kind of a center line that kind of is well defined there, which is very unique. These bolsters are zirconium, and they are in a very fine orange peel, and we'll talk about why that was useful in a bit. And you can also see he's got this shredded carbon fiber scales. And I'm going to put my artificial light on this because it's kind of hard to see, but the scales have this beautiful blue, and good golly, is that just beautiful. It dances in the light. You can really see it well in direct sunlight. I'm not in direct sunlight here in this room, but it's just magnificent. It's probably one of my favorite carbon fibers. I can't explain how beautiful it is, but it just pops. This is not the only one that Stan has used this material on. I know of at least one other, but there might be more. But yeah, it's a really pretty carbon fiber. Continuing to spin you around here, he's got this zirconium pocket clip, of course 3D milled. Matches really well with the flow of the knife. You can see how it kind of twists up here. And then zirconium bolster on this side too. Like I said, it's fingerprint magnet. So I've shown you around. Now it's time to get to business. So a non-flipper flipper, for those of you who may not know what it is, you'll notice that there's no flipper tabs. Let me pull out another knife for you to compare it to. This is a J. Quayback. You can see that the flipper tab is what activates it. So you grab the back of the flipper tab, snap it, blade flies open. This is also a flipper, but it doesn't have any flipper tabs. So you may be wondering, how do you use it? And if you look around, it's really not that intuitive either. You can see people do it, and it just doesn't quite make sense. At the same time, there's no liner locker, no obvious lock back, no button lock. But yeah, the knife unlocks. Oops, misfire there. So what happens is this bolster actually twists. And you can kind of see it here. We'll see if we can get the artificial light back on it. It kicks that pin right there. There's a pocket right there. And this pin kicks the blade out, just like how the flipper tab does on a normal flipper knife. And then, so that would be this bolster. You can see it's got a lot of travel to it. And then this bolster is the one that unlocks it. And I said you don't really see an obvious lockback, but it is kind of a lockback. You can see if you press just before that little seam, which you can only see in the visible light, you really can't feel a lot of it. But if you press just behind it, or just in front of it, you can see it drops down a little bit, and the front of the knife picks up just a little bit. And you can see right in there that there's your hole for the lockback. And all that happens is, yep, you can see it there. Oh, snaps into place. And that's how it works. So this bolster actually twists the lock bar up just the same way. So I'll try and hold it here and do this for you. Just the same way. You can see it just comes up just a little bit. It's going to be difficult to do on camera. But yeah, you can see there it twists up and then the knife blade drops free. So this bolster kicks it out, this bolster unlocks it. And now's a good time while we're looking at it to mention some design choices here. Let me put this away for just a second. But the Damascus stand carries all the way through the lock bar and the backspacer, and it creates this really clean look, and especially on Damascus where you can see the pattern when it's etched, even on the spine. You can see how it just carries all the way through. And I really like that about non-flipper flippers. I see some non-flipper flippers that have different backspacers, and I'm not a fan of that look as much. I kind of prefer the design carried all the way through. You know, everybody's got different tastes, so certainly respect other people's opinions too, but this is my preference. The other thing is, while we're looking here, is we'll talk about maybe some fit and finish details. You absolutely cannot feel seams, especially between the carbon fiber scales and titanium liners and the lock bar. It's very, very impressive how snug this knife is. And especially considering that this bolster moves, it's so impressive how clean the finish on that is and how good the fit is, being that, like, this is a moving part. Like, that's very impressive. This one doesn't move quite as much, but of course it's about the same. I guess while we're also looking, this one is not perlaged or engine turned. I've heard it called that too, but it doesn't have the little like circles that some high-end makers do. This is my TJ Fisher lash, and you can see he's got him. Little help with the light. You can see he's got the engine turning in there, and Stan definitely does this finish, but he didn't choose to do it on, he's got a series of knives that are kind of dark all the way around, carbon fiber, dark bolsters, dark blade, either Damascus or a Sanmai or something like that. And a lot of them don't have perlage, or I've also seen some with just like an acid washed or dark etched blade, and a lot of them don't have that. I kind of do like the perlage, so I would have liked having that on this one, but I didn't commission this one. This one has been through many prominent collectors' hands. It started in, I think, around 2016, maybe 2015-ish, and it was sold probably at Blade Show to a dealer, I think, and then the dealer sold it to a friend of mine. I'm not going to name that friend because I didn't clear it with him before this, but yeah, he got it. And then it traveled to a few other prominent collectors and ended up in some pretty prestigious collections before it found its way back to me. And this is actually the second knife that I bought from the first collector who had it. So I'd consider myself friends with him for sure. He's a good guy to work with. But yeah, so this is the second non-flipper flipper that I've had. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. I kind of got into knives around the 2013, 2014 timeframe, and got out of knives in the 2017 to 2018 time. I was just chasing other hobbies, and custom knives just wasn't a priority for me. And these knives are very, very expensive, so I sold knives in order to pursue other hobbies that I wanted to do more. And then I got back into knives, probably with this one, in 2022, and then expanded my collection a lot in 2024. And the only knife that I bought again from 2017 and the prior collection, like the first wave of my collecting, was a non-flipper flipper. So I sold the old non-flipper flipper for a couple of reasons. And maybe I will put a photo of it right here. Okay. And so you can see it had Mokutai scales, it has Damascus bolsters, and it has a hot blue Damascus blade. And because it had so many dress materials, that thing was basically a boat anchor in your pocket. And I have big knives. Like, I do not shy away from Dalabor's work. I have several big knives from Dalibor. This is a Oberon, and this is the unnamed model. You know, I have the Hoback Quayback. I mean, and these are some big, thick knives, but that thing was just so heavy, and I just never carried it because it wasn't comfortable to carry. And the other thing is that it was so nice and pretty and dressed up and polished. It always had a bunch of fingerprints on it, and I just didn't want to destroy it. And I kind of am one of the collectors who likes to carry their stuff, like even on some of my other knives, like, see if we can get any photos of it. That's like, this one definitely has wear. Okay, well, maybe I'll just have to take my word for it, but I do carry my knives. I do use my knives, and I didn't want to carry or use that one because it was just too nice. So this one is in maybe a slightly better user finish. It does still collect fingerprints, but I think the zirconium hides wear a little bit better. I think there is a little bit of wear on the pocket clip, but it's always hard to see. And it's going to make a liar out of me for now. But the other thing is that this one is much, much lighter because it's got carbon fiber. Zirconium is still a really heavy material, but the carbon fiber, not having a big chunk of mokutai here, definitely saves a lot of the weight. And the other thing we'll talk about is the action. I mentioned that these bolsters have an orange peel on them, and my other one was a Damascus bolster, which in order to etch and see Damascus, you have to polish it to a pretty high polish. And the unlocking of this is kind of difficult. A lot of collectors struggle with this, and the unlocking is probably one of the biggest reasons that people don't buy an NFF, especially collectors who are into the really, really, really high-end stuff. It's usually because they don't like the unlocking. And on super polished bolsters, it's kind of hard. Like, your fingers don't get a lot of grip, and it's already kind of a strange motion. This one is unusually easy, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. I've changed my technique quite a bit. I may drop a video in a second, but I used to always have to come back to the bolster and push on it like this in order to get the blade unlocked. And I've also seen people have to come to the lock bar and push down on it to disengage it. And the mechanism is definitely not as fidgety when you really have to like change your hand position either this way and then kind of let it drop, or whether you have to come back here and then kind of let it drop, right? It's not as fidgety either way. But yeah, so being able to use the bolster also made a big difference for me. When I got this one, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I really wanted. And I have two tricks for that. One is if you put a little bit of lubricant on the back of the blade here, basically what happens is the lock bar is pressing down on the blade, and it presses into those little pockets. I think probably that one. And if you put a little bit of lubricant on the outside, it glides a lot easier, and the lock bar gets nice nice and flexible with you in terms of the, it doesn't experience a lot of additional friction in the lock bar. And I think that helps a little bit, and it also helps it gets a little bit of lubricant into the lock bar channel, and it makes it a little bit easier, because if you got a bunch of extra friction also fighting you, it's not easy to use. So a little tiny bit of lubricant, and I definitely have over lubricated this before. Maybe I'll drop a photo of when Stan took it apart with all the excess lubricant in here. And yeah, so small amounts of lubricant there. And the other thing is, instead of trying to like twist it like a quarter, which is, that's how I've always kind of heard it described as, you kind of want to twist it like a quarter in your hands. Instead of trying to do that, use the pad of your finger right here, kind of come up the blade sideways so that you can put your hand slightly on the back of the blade. You don't want to be all the way across, because then it's kind of hard to use, but you want to be at a slight angle. And so you can kind of see how my finger really isn't grabbing the back bolster, just the blade and the bolster. And you basically want to press down on the blade a little bit and with the bolster. And this is the easiest way I've done it. And I use this hand to kind of brace. I don't know that this hand's doing a lot of twisting, because there's still not enough grip. But that's basically how I unlock it. And the other thing I want to mention about the blade is it's got this really big non-sharpened part. The sharpening part of the blade probably doesn't start until like here. And that's a good thing, because like I push my thumb down on there, like you can see my thumb is not hurting. You kind of need to be able to like grab that blade, and as you unlock it, the blade kind of pops against your hand. So you really need somewhere that's to touch the blade that's not going to be sharp and not going to hurt you. So yeah, that's basically what my solutions are to the unlocking. And this one is far more fidgety than my old one. So yes, those are my kind of non-flipper tricks, and why I got rid of the old one a little bit. Continuing talking about just non-flipper in general, the action on this guy is, it's strange in that it doesn't have like a traditional detent. Like you can see the detent ball. I hope you can see the detent ball. You can kind of see it right there. Sorry for the dirty knife, but it's sitting at the back of the lock bar. This doesn't really have that, because the non-flipper doesn't really have that, because the locking bar is kind of the detent. So the lock bar, as it presses down on the blade in the closed position, that's all that gives it is detent. I'm going to move these for a second. And it doesn't have like the strongest detent. You can definitely kind of whip it out. But I've never like ran into a situation that the blade is like undoing itself in my pocket, or like unintentionally. It's not like it's ready to just drop out and cause havoc or anything. Stan does have one kind of unique solution to this. He's not the only one with an adjustable detent, but if you look down there, right next to his maker's mark, you can see a little a screw. I think it's a T5 screw. And if you screw it in, basically the lock bar gets pressed up on the back here. And when that happens to the front of the lock bar comes down, right? So it's a rigid bar, and as the back comes up, the front goes down because it's pinned in the middle somewhere. And so that puts a little extra detent force on your blade, but it also makes it a little bit harder to unlock, right? The more friction and the more pressure you have keeping the blade locked, the harder that unlock is. So you can definitely play with the tuning of this knife, which is kind of similar to, I'm going to break out the Hoback again. It's kind of similar to the Hoback. He's got this system where you can screw in or screw out this roller ball detent to increase or decrease the detent tension. So that's kind of a unique thing to me. But yeah, so that's another maybe trick to making it easier to unlock as well. But it's kind of cool that you get to do that. It's kind of cool that you get to do that to the detent. So just talking about non-flipper flippers in general, now that I've rambled on about more stuff. Non-flipper flippers, I don't think they're quite as rare as people make them out to be. And it's not that there's not a lot of them, because there's not. It's really that I think a lot of the owners don't post them, and they don't have social media, or they don't post their knives on social media, whatever the deal is. There's probably hundreds of NFFs, but you just don't see most of them. There's a handful of collectors that have social media and post knife content on social media. And you can kind of track those. There's not enough non-flipper flippers out floating around to where like a lot of the people know where the non-flipper flippers are. So like the old one I had, everybody knows who's got it now. This one has switched hands several times, and most people still know who's had it. And that's generally true for most of the configurations. They're just unique enough to where you know who's had them or when they've had them. And I guess that's kind of leads you to think that there's just not very many of them. But to be fair, like if people who have them aren't on social media, you're never going to see them, and you're certainly never going to be able to buy them. So the price of the non-flipper flippers certainly reflects that, and that it's not a common knife. I kind of mentioned in the beginning that I stopped collecting in 2017, 2018 because I just was getting into other stuff and got rid of that non-flipper flipper. This is the only one that came back because the non-flipper flipper was the only model that came back because Stan's not going to make knives forever. Nobody makes knives forever. Excuse me. And I really wanted to have a non-flipper flipper in the collection again because they're very unique knives with the bolster, with the locking and unlocking. There's no Chinese company that's going to be able to produce something quite like this because it's just too difficult to mass produce, and it would be too expensive. Customers probably wouldn't be buying them. And I just regretted getting rid of the old one. This one I think is in a configuration that definitely suits me better, but I wanted to buy another one before they became unobtainable, and I'm glad I did. And this one, like, the fidget factor on this one is super, super high, and I'm really, really happy to have this one. I also want to talk about the design a little bit, since we've rambled on and deviated into story time and brought the knives out, but the bolster flipper design of this kind of overshadows like the aesthetic beauty of this knife in general. Like, look at this blade. It's not like a super complicated grind. Doesn't have like 28 different grind angles or anything like that, but it's just simple and beautiful. It's got a nice big hollow ground. It's got a top swedge and a harpoon style blade and a couple of flats on it. But it's so beautiful. Like, something about the way this blade looks is just gorgeous. It's one of my favorite blades for not being like as wild looking as some others. Not that it's not hard to do. I'm not a knife maker. It's probably still very difficult to get a blade this perfect, but it's so breathtaking. And I love how the handle kind of like swoops back and then it meets up perfectly with the design. Your hand can definitely sit in there if you want to use it. And like I mentioned, since this part's not flat, or since it's not sharpened, you could choke up, tongue-tied. You could choke up to use this if you really wanted to. Like, you're not going to get hurt up there. You can see, like, I'm digging my hand in there and, you know, nothing's happening. As far as this grip goes, like, there's no jimping on here, so it's like, it's not the best knife. And my middle finger falls directly on this, like, bump, which it's not, like, the most ergonomic for me. I've mentioned other knives, this is my Jeremy Marshall Rockstar, that have also had a bump that one of my fingers fall on, and I don't notice it at all with this knife. I do notice this bump with this knife, but it's not uncomfortable. And Stan, as you can see, Stan does a great job of like chamfering all of his edges. You can see it's got, yep, there it is. You can see he's chamfered it, so it's not like it's uncomfortable even in that spot. But it's definitely like kind of a weird like 1.5 finger grip, at least in that first choil. But there's also plenty of real estate on the back of this knife. You could have bigger hands than I do. I have like medium, large hands, and I don't have any problems getting onto this knife. Ironically, in reverse grip, this thing is actually pretty awesome. Both of my fingers, or my smaller fingers, fall perfectly into that channel, and yeah, it's your thumb sits right on top, and I don't see anybody using their non-flipper flipper like this, but it's unusually ergonomic. And of course, the pocket clip is perfectly sculpted, and you don't notice it at all in your hands. There's not even close to a hot spot. It's not even really obtrusive. Like, I always talk about clips I really like. This one is, yeah, you don't notice it at all in your hand. It just melts right into it. So yeah, you can see his kind of his signature pivot design there. It's kind of got this tri-lug thing. And I've seen other pivots in non-flipper flippers that have slightly different designs. But, you know, and it's a nice looking pivot. It's pretty iconic. I think most people could look at the pivot and be able to tell it's a non-flipper flipper, maybe compared to some other knives where it's maybe not quite that easy to tell. But I like that. He's got the matching stainless hardware. I wish this was hidden hardware. I can't remember if I said that, but like I said, I didn't commission the knife, so didn't get to pick that. But that's the only change that I would make to this. Other than that, I've been really into like the darker knives. I've already pulled out the Jeremy Marsh here, but also kind of a dark handle and a dark blade. Maybe we will pull out the hoe back again. Also kind of a darker handle and dark blade. I'm into these kind of like user spec finishes because I just like them. They hide wear well. They look nice. So yeah, I like the design. I like the flipping mechanism. I like the design. The package on this thing is just right. So should you buy one? Well, that is a good question. These are ludicrously expensive. They sit in the very, very tip top of the knife collecting world, along with the other well-known names. And if you find a configuration that you really like and it's at a price you can pull the trigger on, should you do it? Probably. You are probably, you know, everybody's probably, you know, they're limited in lifespan of how long Stan can make these before he wants to retire. So, you know, I don't know when he wants to retire or if he's going to make them as long as he can or what the deal is. But yeah, he's not going to make them forever. And if you ever want to experience one, I'm guessing they're not going to get any cheaper when Stan decides that he's made his last non-flipper flipper. So if you're interested in one and you've got the means to get it and it's a configuration you like, I think it's worth looking into picking one up. I have had two now, and everybody says that, you know, this is their grail knife and they're never going to get rid of it. I've had a grail knife. I've had a full dress Stan Wilson non-flipper flipper. That, I guess that's as close to a grail knife as you could probably get in the tactical folder world. And I ended up selling it. So, I can't say that like nothing I have is ever going to leave the collection, because the reality is that's just not true. But I can also say that there's been very few knives that I've sold and I bought again. This is a first for me, so I don't see this one going anywhere anytime soon, but I also said that about the other one. So I've been really enjoying having this one for now. And the fidget factor is super high, and I am going to continue loving it. The other thing that's kind of unique about this is the sound. So it's got this, it's got a few sounds. The first sound you hear is as the blade kind of comes back and the bolster hits its like full open position. The second sound you hear is the blade snapping into its locked position. And the third sound you hear is the release of the bolster. And it kind of sounds like maybe a shotgun or something, like chambering around. It makes several snaps, which is kind of cool. I've made other comments about like the Jeremy Marsh Rockstar, like its sound. It's got like a really cool industrial ping to it, and yeah, still love that knife. That's a wicked sound. Yeah, I mean, it's got a really interesting mechanic to it in its sound, and I like that. It doesn't quite have like the RJ Martin like double click per se, which is also pretty desirable, but nothing sounds like an RJ Martin, nothing sounds like the non-flipper flipper. There are some other knives that are starting to get the double click of the RJ Martin. Nothing, I don't know how he does that, but I don't see anybody else producing the non-flipper flipper. There is another maker who produces a bolster flipper. It uses kind of like a liner lock thing where you like push down on a button and it pops up the back lock. And it's a cool knife too, but I think the bolster lock, if you don't struggle with that design, having the bolster instead of like the additional plunger is kind of a nice design thing. So that's kind of where that's kind of why I would prefer this one, but I've also never handled one of those, so my mind could be changed in the future. But yeah. Okay, I think this is my longest video by a fair margin, so I will probably give you another look around the knife and then quit while I'm still ahead. Maybe we'll put the light back on it for a second. Yeah, that's just magnificent. So, yep. Thank you, everybody.